Usually when we think about the great philosophers of history, we picture, I don't know, these marble busts of men who live these lives of just pure, serene logic.
Right, yeah. Which is, I mean, largely a myth, right? This idea of the detached genius just floating above the rest of humanity.
Totally unbothered by daily struggles, yeah.
Yeah.
But to start this deep dive, I actually want you to imagine a very different and, well, totally contradictory image.
Oh, this is a good one.
Right. So picture a young man, barely 18, who is so intellectually obsessed, like so driven to understand human nature, that he literally studies himself into a physical breakdown.
A total physical collapse from just overthinking.
Exactly. I mean, he develops a coldness of temper, heart palpitations, and he even gets scurvy spots on his fingers.
Wow. Just his body giving out under the weight of his own relentless curiosity.
Yeah. But okay, now fast forward a few decades.
Yeah.
I want you to imagine that exact same man. He is now famously obese.
Very famously, yes.
He is known across Europe for devouring just massive amounts of pork and cheese. He's cheerful. He's the life of the party in these bustling Parisian salons.
And yet, between bites of cheese, he's casually writing ideas so dangerous that he gets blacklisted from universities.
Accused of heresy.
Yeah, and fully banned by the Catholic Church.
It's wild. Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are pulling from a stack of historical biographies, original essays, and some really recent academic debates to explore the life, the mind, and the highly complicated legacy of David Hume.
An 18th century Scottish philosopher, historian, and essayist.
And the reason you should care about this guy is that he didn't just write dusty academic texts that put college students to sleep. I mean, he fundamentally smashed how humans think about cause and effect.
Right. The concept of the self-religion. He essentially wrote a computer virus that he just injected into the operating system of 18th century logic.
I love that analogy.
It's true. It didn't just delete a few files. It questioned the foundational code itself. I mean, he famously woke Immanuel Kant from his dogmatic slumbers.
And his writings even anticipated Charles Darwin's theory of natural selection by like a full century. I'm just marveling at how a guy who was essentially rejected by traditional academia became one of Europe's most famous historians.
Well, to understand Hume and how he arrived at this brand of radical empiricism, we really have to look at how his early struggles birthed his entire worldview.
So let's go back to the beginning. He was born in Edinburgh in 1711 as David Hume, spelled H-O-M-E.
Right, and he changed the spelling to H-U-M-E in 1734 just so the English would pronounce it correctly.
Which tells you a lot about his pragmatism right out of the gate, I think.
Oh, absolutely. His family pushed him heavily toward a really lucrative, stable career in law, but behind closed doors, he was secretly devouring classical authors.
Like Cicero and Virgil.
Yeah, and at age 18, he experiences what he later called a new scene of thought.
Which is such a dramatic phrase.
It is, but it inspired him to throw away every other pleasure or business and apply himself entirely to this, 10-year study plan.
And that intense monk-like dedication is what led to the breakdown we talked about. His physician actually diagnosed him with what was literally called the disease of the learned.
Which is such a funny historical term. In the 18th century, there was this genuine medical belief that excessive study would literally drain the vital spirits from your body.
And pool your blood in unhealthy ways.
Yeah.
I look at that 10-year study plan and the scurvy, and I can't help but compare it to modern hustle culture.
Totally. Extreme academic burnout.
We think of burnout as a modern thing fueled by screens. But here's Hume in the 1700s, grinding until his body just completely gives out.
And the prescribed cure for this disease of the learned actually perfectly mirrors his later philosophy.
Balancing abstract reason with real-world experience.
Exactly. The doctor told him to take a course of bitters, drink a pint of claret daily, and live a much more active life.
And it worked. He went from being tall, lean, and raw-boned to being sturdy, robust, and healthful-like.
Right. He realized firsthand that getting trapped purely in your own thoughts is physically dangerous. You have to experience the physical world to stay sane.
And that realization sets the stage for his first major work, a Treatise of Human Nature. He spent 4 years writing it in France, depleting almost all his savings.
And when he finally published it at age 27...
It bombed, just completely bombed. He famously lamented that it fell dead-born from the press.
Critics at the time called it abstract and unintelligible. It was a massive commercial failure.
But the irony is that the very reason the book failed, because it refused to rely on the comforting logic of the era, is exactly what makes it a masterpiece today.
The ideas buried in that dead-born text completely dismantled the rules of reason.
Okay, let's unpack this. He starts with a premise called the copy principle, focusing on the difference between impressions and ideas.
Right. Hume acted like an auditor going through the accounting books of human perception. He argued that all our so-called ideas are just faint, diluted copies of our impressions.
Impressions being the original, forceful sensory experiences we feel in real time. Let's use the hot pan analogy from the text to make this concrete for everyone listening.
Yeah, that's a great example.
There is a massive difference between actually touching a scorching hot cast iron pan,
Yeah.
that's an impression, it's forceful, it's painful, versus just thinking about touching a hot pan later that evening.
Exactly. That thought is the idea. It's just a pale reflection of the reality.
Right.
But what's fascinating here is that from that starting point, Hume derives his most terrifying concept, the problem of induction and causation.
Okay, lay this out for us.
Well, before Hume, people generally assumed that logic proved that one event intrinsically causes another.
Wait, I'm stuck here. Are you saying Hume didn't believe dropping a glass causes it to shatter? Or that fire causes heat? That sounds kind of ridiculous.
I know, it does. But he argued that we never actually perceive the hidden force that makes one thing cause another.
Yeah.
We only see what he called a constant conjunction of events. Event A happens and event B follows, over and over.
So you drop the glass, it shatters.
Yes, but you never actually observe the invisible mechanism of causation itself. You just see a sequence. He said we assume the future will resemble the past entirely out of custom and habit.
Not because of undeniable logic.
Right.
So if you are listening to this and thinking, well, of course the sun will rise tomorrow, we have physics and gravity to prove it, Hume is actually a step ahead of you.
Oh, way ahead.
Because physics relies entirely on the assumption that the fundamental laws of the universe will behave tomorrow exactly as they behaved yesterday.
And Hume is saying you can't rationally justify that assumption. You just believe it because it's a really helpful habit for your survival.
Which is staggering. If we cannot prove the sun will rise tomorrow using pure logic, then the very bedrock of human certainty turns to sand.
Science, everyday life, it all relies on this assumption of uniformity.
And he doesn't stop there. He takes this exact same teardown method and applies it to the human ego.
Yes, the bundle theory of self.
Let's do an introspection exercise right now. Hume challenged his readers to look inside their own minds and try to catch a glimpse of their self without a specific feeling attached.
Try to observe the core you without observing yourself feeling hot or sad or hungry.
You can't do it. Every time you look inward, you stumble onto a specific perception.
Because of this, he argued there is no underlying permanent self or soul. We are just a bundle of constantly changing sensations moving at incredible speed.
It's remarkably modern, almost like a Buddhist concept, just dismantling Western ideas of a permanent identity.
And then he drags this profound skepticism straight into ethics.
Oh, right, because at the time, the reigning intellectuals were the rationalists. They believed you could figure out the universal laws of morality using pure math and logic.
And Hume comes along and says, no, logic is just a calculator. Your emotions are what actually punch the buttons.
Leading to his most famous declaration. Reason is, and ought only to be, the slave of the passions.
He's pointing out that facts don't inherently motivate anyone to do anything. It's your feelings, desires, fears that drive human behavior. Reason just acts as a map to help you get what your passions already want.
Unsurprisingly, the academic establishment did not take kindly to being told their prized logic was just a servant to their emotions.
No, they didn't. He was viewed as deeply dangerous, often labeled an atheist.
Yeah, when he applied for university chairs at Edinburgh and Glasgow, there were organized protests.
He was completely shut out of the traditional academic track. A mind of his caliber effectively barred from teaching anywhere in his own country.
But because academia shut him out, he needed a backdoor to fame, and he found it in the most unlikely place. He took a job as an unpaid librarian.
For the Faculty of Advocates, on paper it looks like a humiliating defeat.
Totally.
Managing books for lawyers without a real salary.
But I'd argue this seemingly disastrous job rejection gave him the exact tool he needed: unchecked access to a massive archive of historical documents.
Which he leveraged to write a 1,000,000-word, 6-volume book called The History of England.
Tracing events from Julius Caesar's invasion all the way to the revolution in 1688.
It was one of the first massive secular narrative histories of its kind. He didn't just list dates, he told a sweeping story of human nature.
And it becomes a massive bestseller across Europe. It made Hume rich, famous, and the dominant interpreter of English history for 60 years.
Achieving his ruling passion literary fame.
And that financial independence gave him a powerful shield, right? He was no longer dependent on the good graces of the academic establishment.
Exactly. With that insulation, he turned his skeptical lens onto the most dangerous taboo topic of the 18th century.
Organized religion.
Right. He introduces this mathematical, probability-based argument against miracles that is incredibly hard to refute.
He defines a miracle as an explicit violation of a natural law. So when someone tells you a miracle happened, he says you have to weigh the probabilities.
You are forced to ask yourself, what is statistically more likely? Is it more likely that the unbroken laws of nature were suddenly suspended for this one event?
Or is it more likely that the human being telling you this story is lying, hallucinating, or trying to promote their own religion?
Right. He pointed out that people naturally love wonder and gossip.
And then he goes after the design argument, the classic idea that because the universe is so incredibly complex, like a finely tuned pocket watch, it must have a divine watchmaker.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, Hume completely undercuts that assumption. He asks, even if you see a complex world, does it definitively prove a perfect designer?
Right. He dangerously suggested that a stupid mechanic could have botched and bungled thousands of worlds over an eternity before randomly arriving at this one functioning universe.
Basically describing random mutation and trial and error, the core engines of natural selection, a full century before Darwin.
The religious authorities were furious. He only avoided a formal heresy trial because his wealthy friends protected him.
But all his works were placed on the Catholic Church's Index of Banned Books in 1761 anyway.
Though to be precise, Hume wasn't necessarily a hardline atheist in the modern sense.
No, he argued that religious belief ultimately traces back to a very human psychological dread of the unknown.
So we have this picture of Hume as the ultimate skeptic interrogating human biases. But here's where it gets really interesting, because our sources also highlight a deeply debated aspect of his legacy.
Yes.
Modern scholarship reveals that Hume had profound blind spots regarding race and the transatlantic slave trade.
It's a very complex part of his historical record, and we're going to look closely at the facts and the ongoing scholarly debate exactly as they appear in the research.
The debate centers significantly on a piece of correspondence that stayed buried for centuries. An academic named Felix Waldman published it in 2014.
Right. In March of 1766, Hume wrote a letter to his patron, Lord Hertford.
In this letter, Hume communicated a proposal from some partners to acquire a half share of a slave plantation in Grenada. And the historical records also show that around this exact same time, Hume loaned £400 to one of those investors, a man named John Stuart.
Just for context, a £400 loan in the 1760s is equivalent to roughly £75,000 today.
Scholars like Waldman argue that this correspondence, combined with a significant loan, serves as proof that Hume actively facilitated and sought to benefit financially from the slave trade.
Conversely, there are scholars who examine the same documents and defend Hume's actions in this specific instance.
Researchers like Peter Hutton, David Ashton, and Alan Bailey argue that Hume was merely fulfilling his administrative duties as a secretary.
In their view, he was conveying a message and vouching for a friend's personal integrity. They emphasize there is no extant proof connecting the loan specifically to the funding of the plantation.
Another scholar, James Pfizer, notes that while the exact purpose of the loan isn't explicitly documented, the timing of the money transfer makes it very difficult to separate from the plantation project.
However, Pfizer suggests it may have functioned more as a personal loan to a close friend in need of capital, rather than a calculated business venture by Hume himself.
But the scholarly examination extends beyond his financial dealings and into the written text of his philosophy. In 1753, Hume appended a footnote to his essay Of National Characters.
Yeah, in that footnote, he wrote that he suspected non-white people to be naturally inferior to the whites, explicitly claiming they had produced no notable arts or sciences.
And even the most ardent defenders of his broader philosophical work acknowledge that this footnote is, in their own words, especially shocking and deeply puzzling, coming from a man who demanded empirical evidence for everything.
Because of this dual legacy, the brilliant skeptic and the man who harbored the horrific prejudices of his era, there has been a significant modern reckoning. In 2020, students at Edinburgh University successfully campaigned to rename the David Hume Tower.
It's a profound historical contradiction. A philosopher who literally built his career on tearing down illogical customs, falling prey to the baseless, racist customs of his own society.
But this forces anyone reading history to do exactly what Hume himself advocated. You have to critically examine the evidence, question your intellectual heroes, and hold multiple, sometimes deeply conflicting historical realities at the exact same time.
Which brings us to the final chapter of his life, the ultimate test for any radical skeptic. How does a man who doubts the permanent self and spent his life arguing against the rational basis of religion actually face his own mortality?
Well, in 1776, at the age of 65, he was diagnosed with terminal abdominal cancer.
And the famous diarist James Boswell forced a visit on him. Boswell was this deeply anxious man, terrified of death, and he was practically begging for a deathbed conversion.
He desperately wanted the famous skeptic to finally crack, to confess a hidden belief in the afterlife, just in case.
And Hume completely refused to give him that comfort. Even while his body was failing, he told his visitor that the idea of life after death was a most unreasonable fancy.
He kept his razor-sharp sense of humor right up to the end, too. His close friend, the economist Adam Smith, recounted a joke Hume made about his own dying process.
Oh, I love this story. Hume imagined himself walking down to the river Styx and asking Charon, the ferryman of the underworld, for just a few more years of life.
So he could stick around long enough to see the total downfall of religious superstition.
And Adam Smith recalled Hume imagining Charon's blunt reply. "You loitering rogue, that will not happen these many hundred years. Get into the boat this instant."
Get into the boat. He was completely at peace with his own physical end.
In the last year of his life, he wrote a tiny 5-page autobiography titled My Own Life. And he didn't use those pages to pretend he was a perfect saint. He openly confessed his vanity, his immense love for literary fame.
But he noted he was dying with a cheerful temper. He left it entirely to posterity, to add the rest to his simple tombstone on Colton Hill.
And posterity has definitely been busy adding to it ever since. Let's bring all these threads back to the core mission of our deep dive. David Hume challenged the absolute bedrock of human knowledge.
He looked at an 18th century world, convinced it was governed by pure reason, and he said, "No, look closer. We are creatures driven by unthinking habit, societal custom, and emotion."
He left a legacy that shook philosophy, anticipated modern science, and still sparks fierce debates today.
He forces us to realize the ground we stand on, our certainty about cause and effect, induction, our very self, is much softer than we like to admit.
That leads me to a final thought for you to ponder. We talked earlier about his realization. Reason is, and ought only to be, the slave of the passions.
Right.
If Hume is right about that our choices and firmest beliefs are ultimately driven by emotions and habits, rather than calculating logic,
then how much of our modern world is built on a totally false assumption of human rationality?
Think about how we argue about politics online. We constantly throw statistics and charts at each other, genuinely expecting a perfectly logical argument will change someone's mind.
Or how we design our justice systems or economic models, assuming humans will act rationally.
If Hume was right, we are treating a symptom with the wrong medicine entirely.
It suggests we need to understand the human heart, our biases, and our ingrained habits far better if we ever hope to change minds or build better systems.
So the next time you find yourself entirely certain about why something happens, or why you believe what you believe, remember the young man who studied himself into scurvy just to figure out the limits of the human mind. Remember that sometimes what looks like a clear, clean X-ray of reality is actually just a reflection in muddy waters. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into David Hume. We invite you to question your own habits of thought before the next deep dive.